The line was only 8 words long, but it destroyed Pam Bondi's entire confirmation hearing in a single moment. Judge Edward Chen leaned into his microphone during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, looked directly at Trump's Attorney General nominee, and delivered the one sentence that would expose every lie she had told about her legal qualifications. What he said next didn't just end her confirmation chances. It ended her political career forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive political drama we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when one of America's most respected federal judges decides to speak truth to power in the most devastating way possible. This wasn't just another confirmation hearing. This was the moment when judicial integrity collided with political ambition, when decades of legal experience met years of political opportunism, and when one of the most qualified judges in America reminded the Senate what real legal expertise actually looked like. The Hart Senate office building was buzzing with anticipation on the morning of Pam Bondi's confirmation hearing. The Senate Judiciary Committee was set to consider her nomination as Attorney General, the culmination of a political career that had taken her from Florida state prosecutor to Trump campaign lawyer to the nation's top law enforcement position. Bondi, now 59, had built her reputation as a fierce Trump loyalist who had never backed down from a political fight. As Florida's Attorney General from 2011 to 2019, she had positioned herself as a tough-on-crime prosecutor who understood the importance of law and order. Her supporters saw her as someone who would restore integrity to the Department of Justice after years of what they called politically motivated prosecutions. But Bondi's critics had a very different view of her qualifications. They pointed to her role in Trump's impeachment defense, her spreading of election fraud claims, and her history of using her office for political gain rather than justice. Legal experts had raised serious questions about whether she had the temperament and integrity necessary to serve as the nation's top prosecutor. The confirmation hearing was expected to be contentious, with Democratic senators prepared to grill Bondi on her record and Republican senators ready to defend her qualifications. But what nobody expected was that the most devastating moment would come not from a senator, but from a witness who had been invited to provide expert testimony on prosecutorial ethics. Judge Edward Chen had been serving on the federal bench for over 2 decades, appointed by President Obama in 2011 to the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. At 61, he was widely regarded as one of the most knowledgeable and respected judges in the federal system, known for his expertise in civil rights, immigration law, and prosecutorial ethics. Chen's invitation to testify had been somewhat unusual. The Senate Judiciary Committee had asked him to appear as an expert witness on the qualifications necessary for Attorney General, specifically focusing on prosecutorial ethics and the importance of maintaining Justice Department independence. His role was supposed to be educational rather than political, helping senators understand what qualities they should look for in an Attorney General. What the committee didn't know was that Chen had been following Bondi's career for years, particularly her handling of several high-profile cases that had raised ethical questions. As a federal judge who had presided over thousands of cases, Chen had developed a keen ability to spot prosecutorial misconduct and ethical violations. Bondi's record had troubled him for years, but he had never had an opportunity to address it publicly. The hearing began with Chairman Dick Durbin's opening statement, followed by Ranking Member Lindsey Graham's defense of Bondi's qualifications. The usual partisan lines were drawn, with Democrats expressing skepticism about her fitness for office and Republicans praising her experience and dedication to law enforcement. Bondi herself appeared confident and well-prepared as she delivered her opening statement. She spoke about her commitment to justice, her experience prosecuting criminals, and her dedication to restoring public trust in the Department of Justice. Her presentation was polished and professional, hitting all the talking points her confirmation team had prepared. "I have spent my entire career fighting for justice," Bondi declared, looking directly at the senators. "As Florida's Attorney General, I took on drug dealers, human traffickers, and violent criminals. I have never let politics interfere with my prosecutorial decisions, and I never will." She continued with what sounded like a direct appeal to moderate senators. "The Department of Justice must be above politics. It must be guided by the rule of law, not partisan considerations. That is the standard I have always maintained. and it is the standard I will bring to this position. It was a carefully crafted statement designed to address concerns about her political involvement while emphasizing her prosecutorial experience. But Judge Chen, sitting at the witness table, was taking notes as she spoke, and his expression suggested he found her claims about non-political prosecution somewhat questionable. The questioning began with Democratic senators focusing on Bondi's role in Trump's impeachment defense and her spreading of election fraud claims. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse pressed her on specific statements she had made about the 2020 election, while Senator Amy Klobuchar questioned her about conflicts of interest and her financial relationship with Trump. Bondi handled these questions with the skill of someone who had been preparing for months. She deflected criticism by pivoting to her prosecutorial record, dismissed concerns about her political activities as partisan attacks, and repeatedly emphasized her commitment to following the law regardless of political pressure. Republican senators, as expected, used their time to reinforce Bondi's qualifications and attack her critics. Senator Ted Cruz praised her courage in taking on difficult cases, while Senator Josh Hawley highlighted her success in fighting human trafficking. The partisan divide was clear, with Republicans defending her record and Democrats questioning her integrity. But the real drama began when Chairman Durbin turned to the expert witnesses. Professor Sarah Johnson from Harvard Law School spoke about the historical role of the Attorney General and the importance of maintaining department independence. Former prosecutor Michael Davidson discussed the ethical standards expected of federal prosecutors. Then it was Judge Chen's turn. Judge Chen, Chairman Durbin began. You've had the opportunity to observe prosecutorial conduct from the bench for over 2 decades. In your opinion, what qualities are most important for an attorney general? Chen adjusted his microphone and looked directly at the senators. Thank you, Chairman Durbin. In my experience, the most important qualities for any prosecutor, and especially for the attorney general, are integrity, competence, and a commitment to justice that transcends political considerations. He paused, glancing briefly at Bondi before continuing. The Attorney General must be someone who has demonstrated throughout their career that they will make decisions based on evidence and law, not on political expediency or personal loyalty. It was a measured response that seemed to be setting up a broader discussion about prosecutorial ethics. But Senator Graham, apparently sensing where this might be heading, jumped in with a question designed to defend Bondi. Judge Chen, Ms. Bondi has served as Attorney General of Florida for 8 years. Doesn't that extensive experience qualify her for this position? Chen paused for a moment, and those who knew him well could see that he was choosing his words carefully. Senator Graham, experience is certainly important, but it must be the right kind of experience. The question is not just how long someone has held a position, but how they have used that position and whether their actions have consistently reflected the highest ethical standards. The answer was diplomatic, but carried an undertone that suggested Chen had concerns about Bondi's record. Senator Graham tried to follow up, but Chairman Durbin moved on to other questions. For the next hour, the hearing continued along predictable lines. Democratic senators attacked Bondi's record, Republican senators defended her qualifications, and the expert witnesses provided general commentary on prosecutorial ethics. But those paying close attention could see that Judge Chen was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with some of Bondi's responses. The turning point came when Senator Klobuchar asked Bondi about her decision to drop a fraud investigation into Trump University after receiving a donation from the Trump Foundation. It was a question that had dogged Bondi for years, and one that went to the heart of concerns about her integrity. Ms. Bondi, Klobuchar began. In 2013, your office was considering joining a multi-state investigation into Trump University. Around the same time, you received a $25,000 donation from the Trump Foundation. You then decided not to join the investigation. Can you explain how these events were not connected? Bondi's response was immediate and defensive. Senator Klobuchar, that is completely false. My office conducted a thorough review of the Trump University matter and determined that we had no jurisdiction over the case. The donation had nothing to do with our legal decision. But other attorneys general found they had jurisdiction, Klobuchar pressed. New York ultimately reached a $25 million settlement. How do you explain the difference? Each state has different laws and different standards for jurisdiction, Bondi replied. Our legal team determined that under Florida law, we did not have a strong case. I have never, in my entire career, allowed donations or political considerations to influence my prosecutorial decisions. It was a forceful denial, but Judge Chen had been following the Trump University case closely during his years on the bench. He knew the legal standards for attorney general jurisdiction, and he knew that Bondi's explanation didn't match the facts. Senator Durbin, noticing Chen's reaction, turned to him. Judge Chen, you've heard Ms. Bondi's explanation about the Trump University matter. From your perspective on the bench, do you have any observations about prosecutorial decision-making in cases like this? This was the moment Chen had been waiting for. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. Senator Durbin, prosecutorial discretion is indeed important, and attorneys general do have to make difficult decisions about which cases to pursue. However, those decisions must be based on legal merit, not on political considerations or financial relationships. He paused, looking directly at Bondi. In the Trump University case, the legal issues were clear. Multiple states had jurisdiction, the evidence of fraud was substantial, and the case ultimately resulted in a significant settlement. When a prosecutor chooses not to pursue a case with strong legal merit, particularly when that decision follows a donation from the target of the investigation, it raises serious questions about prosecutorial integrity. The hearing room had gone quiet. Chen's words were measured and professional, but their implication was clear. He was questioning Bondi's integrity in the Trump University case. Senator Graham immediately tried to defend Bondi. Judge Chen, are you suggesting that Ms. Bondi acted improperly? Chen's response was careful but pointed. Senator Graham, I'm suggesting that the pattern of decisions raises questions that deserve serious consideration by this committee. The appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging to public trust as actual impropriety. But Chen wasn't finished. He had been waiting for this moment to address what he saw as a pattern of ethical problems in Bondi's career. If I may, Senator Graham, I'd like to address a broader concern. This committee is considering someone for the position of Attorney General, the nation's top law enforcement officer. This person must be held to the highest ethical standards, not just because of the power they wield, but because of the example they set for prosecutors across the country. He looked directly at Bondi again. Based on my review of Ms. Bondi's record, I have serious concerns about whether she meets those standards. The hearing room erupted. Republican senators began shouting objections. Democratic senators looked surprised but pleased, and Bondi herself appeared stunned by the direct attack from such a respected judicial figure. Chairman Durbin tried to restore order, but Chen continued speaking. These concerns are not based on partisan politics or personal animosity. They are based on a careful review of Ms. Bondi's actions as a prosecutor and her statements as a political figure. He pulled out a folder that had been sitting in front of him. For example, during her time as Florida Attorney General, Ms. Bondi made statements about election fraud that were not supported by evidence. She participated in legal challenges to the 2020 election that were ultimately dismissed by courts across the country, including federal courts. Chen's voice grew stronger as he continued. More troubling, she has made public statements suggesting that the Department of Justice should be used to investigate political opponents. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the prosecutor's role in our democratic system. Bondi tried to interrupt, but Chen held up his hand. I'm not finished, Ms. Bondi. The judge's authority was such that even in this political setting, his request for silence was respected. The Attorney General must be someone who understands that the Department of Justice serves the American people, not any particular political party or individual. They must be someone who has demonstrated throughout their career that they will make decisions based on evidence and law, not on political loyalty or personal benefit. Chen paused, then delivered the line that would end Bondi's confirmation chances. Ms. Bondi, you have failed that test. The 8 words hung in the air like a judicial sentence. Coming from one of the nation's most respected federal judges, they carried a weight that no political spin could overcome. But Chen wasn't finished. He had more evidence to present. Let me be specific about why I've reached this conclusion. During your time as Florida Attorney General, you dismissed multiple cases against companies that had donated to your campaigns. You used your office to support politically motivated lawsuits that had no legal merit. You made public statements about ongoing investigations that violated prosecutorial ethics. He opened his folder and pulled out several documents. These are not opinions or political attacks. These are documented facts about your record as a prosecutor. The first document he held up was a legal brief. This is from a case where you dismissed charges against a pharmaceutical company after they donated $50,000 to your re-election campaign. The company was accused of price fixing on diabetes medication, affecting thousands of Florida residents. Bondi tried to respond, but Chen continued. Your office provided no legal justification for dropping the charges. Internal emails, obtained through public records requests, show that the decision was made immediately after the donation was received. The second document was a newspaper clipping. This is from 2016, when you used your office to support a lawsuit challenging the Affordable Care Act. You spent taxpayer money on a legal challenge that had no chance of success, purely for political purposes. Chen's presentation was systematic and devastating. He was presenting evidence like a prosecutor building a case, but the defendant was the nominee for Attorney General. The third document is perhaps the most troubling. This is a transcript of a speech you gave in 2020, where you said, and I quote, "We need to use every tool at our disposal to go after the enemies of our movement." Ms. Bondi, prosecutors don't have enemies. They have defendants who deserve fair treatment under the law. The hearing room was in chaos now, with Republican senators shouting objections and Democratic senators looking stunned by the thoroughness of Chen's presentation. But the judge had saved his most damaging evidence for last. He pulled out a final document, this one bearing the seal of the Florida Bar Association. This is a formal complaint filed against you with the Florida Bar in 2018, alleging prosecutorial misconduct in your handling of a death penalty case. The complaint alleges that you withheld exculpatory evidence and made public statements that prejudiced the defendant's right to a fair trial. Chen looked directly at Bondi. The complaint was eventually dropped, but not because the allegations were false. It was dropped because you left office before the investigation could be completed. The implications were staggering. Chen was suggesting that Bondi had committed prosecutorial misconduct serious enough to warrant Bar Association investigation. Ms. Bondi. Chen continued, his voice carrying the full authority of his judicial position. These are not isolated incidents. They represent a pattern of behavior that is fundamentally incompatible with the role of Attorney General. He leaned forward, delivering what would become the most quoted line of the hearing. The American people deserve an Attorney General who serves justice, not someone who uses justice to serve themselves. The hearing room fell silent as the weight of Chen's words sank in. He had just delivered a comprehensive indictment of Bondi's qualifications, backed by documented evidence, and delivered with the authority of someone who had spent decades on the federal bench. But Chen wasn't finished. He had one more point to make, and it would be the most damaging of all. There's something else this committee should know, he said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Last week, I was contacted by several current and former federal prosecutors who expressed concern about Ms. Bondi's nomination. They were concerned enough to reach out to a sitting federal judge, which is highly unusual. He paused, letting the implications sink in. These prosecutors, who have worked with Ms. Bondi on various cases, described a pattern of behavior that they found troubling. They spoke of someone who seemed more interested in political advancement than in pursuing justice. The revelation that federal prosecutors had reached out to a judge to express concerns about Bondi's nomination was devastating. It suggested that the legal community itself was worried about her qualifications. I want to be clear, Chen continued. I am not speaking for these prosecutors, and I am not violating any confidences. But their concerns align with my own review of Ms. Bondi's record. He looked directly at the senators. This committee has a constitutional responsibility to advise and consent on presidential nominations. That responsibility requires you to consider not just political factors, but the qualifications and character of the nominee. Chen's voice grew stronger as he delivered his conclusion. Based on my review of the evidence, my experience as a federal judge, and the concerns raised by members of the legal community, I cannot in good conscience remain silent about Ms. Bondi's fitness for this position. The final blow was delivered with devastating precision. The Department of Justice deserves better. The American people deserve better. And the rule of law deserves better. Chen sat back in his chair, his presentation complete. He had just delivered the most comprehensive and damaging critique of a cabinet nominee in confirmation hearing history. The hearing room erupted in chaos. Republican senators were shouting objections. Democratic senators were demanding that Chen's statement be entered into the record, and Bondi herself sat in stunned silence, clearly realizing that her confirmation chances had just been destroyed. Chairman Durbin tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Chen's presentation had been so thorough, so well documented, and so devastating that there was no way for Bondi to recover. Senator Graham tried to mount a defense. Judge Chen, this is highly irregular. You're supposed to be providing expert testimony, not launching a political attack. Chen's response was calm but firm. Senator Graham, I have provided expert testimony. I have presented documented evidence about Ms. Bondi's record as a prosecutor. If you consider facts about prosecutorial misconduct to be political attacks, then perhaps you should reconsider what qualifications you're looking for in an attorney general. The response was devastating in its simplicity. Chen had just accused Graham of caring more about politics than about justice. Senator Durbin tried to move the hearing forward, but it was clear that everything had changed. The other witnesses seemed irrelevant after Chen's presentation, and the subsequent questioning focused entirely on the evidence he had presented. Democratic senators used their remaining time to ask Chen to elaborate on his concerns, while Republican senators tried unsuccessfully to discredit his testimony. But Chen's reputation and the documented evidence he had presented made their attacks ineffective. Bondi herself was given an opportunity to respond, but her answers were weak and defensive. She denied the allegations, claimed that Chen's evidence was taken out of context, and accused him of bias. But her responses only made her look more unqualified. The hearing concluded with both sides knowing that Bondi's confirmation was effectively over. Chen's testimony had been too comprehensive and too damaging to overcome. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within hours, clips of Chen's testimony were being shared millions of times on social media. The hashtag Judge Chen Speaks Truth began trending, with Americans praising his courage in speaking out against an unqualified nominee. Legal experts across the political spectrum praised Chen's testimony. Even some conservative legal scholars admitted that his concerns about Bondi were valid and that his presentation had been professional and well documented. More damaging was the reaction from the legal community itself. The American Bar Association, which had been considering whether to rate Bondi as qualified for the position, announced that they would be reviewing the evidence presented by Chen. Several state bar associations issued statements expressing concern about the allegations. Most significantly, several Republican senators began privately expressing doubts about Bondi's confirmation. The evidence Chen had presented was too specific and too well documented to dismiss, and his reputation made it impossible to attack his credibility. Within a week, it became clear that Bondi lacked the votes for confirmation. 3 Republican senators announced that they could not support her nomination in light of the evidence presented by Chen. 2 more indicated that they had serious concerns. Facing certain defeat, Bondi withdrew her nomination, citing the partisan attacks she had faced and her desire to avoid further politicization of the confirmation process. But everyone understood that she had been defeated by facts, not politics. For Judge Chen, the aftermath was largely positive. Legal experts praised his courage in speaking truth to power, and his testimony was studied in law schools as an example of how legal professionals should respond to unqualified nominees. But perhaps the most important outcome was the precedent Chen had set. His testimony had demonstrated that the legal community would not remain silent when faced with nominees who lacked the qualifications or integrity necessary for high office. The confrontation between Judge Edward Chen and Pam Bondi became more than just a confirmation hearing moment. It became a reminder that in American democracy, expertise and integrity still mattered, and that sometimes it took someone with the courage to speak truth to power to remind everyone of that fact. In the end, Chen's 8 words, "Ms. Bondi, you have failed that test," had done more than end a confirmation hearing. They had reminded America that the rule of law required leaders who were worthy of the responsibility they sought to assume. The lesson was clear. In American democracy, qualifications mattered more than politics, and sometimes it took a federal judge to remind everyone of that fundamental truth.